For over 15 years, Saturdays and Illegal Curve have been synonymous with one another. With insight, analysis, and interviews regarding the Winnipeg Jets, the Manitoba Moose, and all around the NHL, here are Dave Manouk, Ezra Ginsburg, and your host, Drew Mindell. The Illegal Curve Hockey Show, presented by Play Now, the official sports betting partner of the Winnipeg Jets, starts now.
Good morning, Winnipeg. Good morning, Manitoba. For all those joining us live this morning on our YouTube channel and all of our social media platforms, we say good morning, universe, and welcome to the Illegal Curve Hockey Show. Along with Dave Manouk, along with Ezra Ginsburg, along with Scott joining us from Virginia Beach, home of the Norfolk Admirals, we say good morning, universe, and welcome. I am your host, Drew Mindell, here for the next couple of hours to talk about everything to do with the Winnipeg Jets. The Jets in action on this Saturday afternoon in the Windy City of the South, Chicago, Illinois, against the Blackhawks. A matinee affair. Will be all about that game throughout the course of the next couple hours. Gentlemen, good to see you both on this Saturday morning. The Jets got off the schneid with a much-needed win on Thursday against the Sabres. They look to double it up against a bad Chicago Blackhawks team, albeit one that's looking to get the dead cat bounce that comes with a new head coach. Nice to see you guys on this Saturday morning.
Nice to see you boys as well. Yeah, it's a nice change, right, to be talking about a win as opposed to those 4 losses in a row. And as you mentioned, Drew, like they have a good opportunity here to put a win streak together. Obviously, you know, Columbus is doing significantly better than Chicago. Chicago is in obviously all sorts of trouble. Nobody really expected Chicago to do much this year, but I don't think many of us expected Luke Richardson to be fired this early in the season. Maybe some people did, but I certainly didn't, because like I just said, the expectations, boys, for the Chicago Blackhawks team were not very high. I think if you were able to finish 7th in the division, that would be an accomplishment, right? Mm-hmm. Because we know how many other good teams there are in the Central Division, right? So hopefully the Jets are going to be able to keep the good feelings going. And excited to talk about some puck for a couple hours.
Yeah, Mike McIntyre, the Winnipeg Free Press, who's got a great feature on what goes into a traveling road show like the Jets had during their road trip, is going to join us in the bottom of the hour. We'll talk about that and talk about everything to do with the Jets. And then in the hour number 2, Charlie Remuliotis, who covers the Blackhawks. He's their radio studio host on the radio side of things. He's going to join us to talk about the Blackhawks as well. So all about the Jets, all about the Blackhawks, previewing that game later on this afternoon. All about Illegal Curve on this Saturday morning. Dave, I want to start with you and with a quote you sent me last night. And it has to do with a lot of the questions about the Jets defense as of late and what I'll describe as the unusual third pairing of Logan Stanley and Ville Heinola. The fact that it's unusual is that they're both left shot defensemen, and you have one of them, you know, Heinola in this instance, playing on his offside. Here's the quote from assistant coach Dean Chenoweth. This from yesterday, if I'm not mistaken, and correct me if I'm wrong on that, Dave. Quote, "We have guys that were put in circumstances at training camp out of their control with injuries. So giving them a little bit of a runway, see what we got with them, be able to work with them, and see where it goes." Jets assistant coach basically talking about Heinola and Stanley as their third pair, as it has been for the last number of games, to what I would describe as maybe less than stellar results, and the seeming logic behind it, or where the Jets are going to continue to roll with it, at least moving forward in the short term. I guess a 2-part question. Does the comment from Dean Chenoweth sort of hold water to you? Because it doesn't really hold that much water to me, because if you're telling me that the plan at training camp, that if Stanley had been healthy and if Heinola had been healthy, was that they were going to use Heinola on his offside, and that was the plan if both of them were healthy, and that was going to be your third pairing, to start the year. That doesn't pass the smell test fully for me, in my opinion.
Well, I mean, since you know that I held this opinion on. Wait, what was the 2-parter? You said it was a 2-part question.
Oh, sorry. I guess that was my first part, and the second part is sort of what's your take on that? How do you sort of considering what everything that you've seen, considering everything you've heard, having attended, all of training camp, which of course was so many games ago now, does this hold water, or is this maybe them trying to reinvent history a little bit in an effort to cool the temperatures with having these two left shot defensemen as you're on your third pair?
Well, I mean, look, I mean, clearly I had my position that I said on the last post-game show, which is that I felt exactly what Dean Chenoweth kind of confirmed yesterday after practice in Chicago. And like I said, people don't have to like it, but the reality is they want to know. Like I said, 2 days ago, Colin Miller, you know what you got in him. He's a very solid third pairing defenseman. I know a lot of folks like what he brings to the games night in, night out. And, he's not going anywhere, right? He's under contract. He's what you have. I don't think that they'll give Heinola, I think on the show, like 10, 15 games. I don't think they're going to keep Miller out that long, boys. But no, I do think that they want to see what they've got. I do think you have to be able to evaluate these guys. And now's the time to do it. Like I said a couple days ago, you don't want to be evaluating Ville Heinola and Logan Stanley in like 2 months or 3 months and be like, well, it's too late now for us to do anything because the trade deadline passed, 3 weeks ago. But now we got to figure out what we have in these 7, 8, 9 defensemen. You have to be able to figure out where these guys can play and what they're capable of doing. And you don't find it out after one game. So like I said, especially against now that you've got slightly weaker competition in Chicago and in Columbus, I just think that it's an avenue that the Jets can explore and they can see what they've got. And like I said, if they give them 5, 6 games and they don't like what they see, and I understand your position, Drew, because it makes sense. You know what you have in Logan Stanley. You can't say the same thing about Ville Heinola. But like I said, I just think that it does kind of make sense to me because I think it is something that they want to see. I know that Scott Arniel wanted to see Ville Heinola. So again, like I said, they'll give these guys a shot and then.
But are you seeing that? I mean, is it fair? I mean, I think Bob's video said this, in the chat, and, fair is, of course, something for children by and large. It's not fair. Life isn't fair and that whole cliche and all. But are you really seeing, Ezzy, what Ville Heinola can do when you're playing him on his offside? I mean, that's not where typically you would expect to see him excel. You would expect to see him at his strongest on the left side, third pair, playing against weaker competition, at least to start in his what they hope to have be his regular stint as an NHL defenseman. Is this fair to Ville Heinola that they're trying to evaluate him on the offside?
Well, I is it fair? I don't know. Is life fair, Drew? Like,
well,
I
mean, is it
I don't know.
reasonable?
I think more the question is
fair?
Is it the are you optimizing your roster
there you go.
as opposed to it being fair, right? Like, I don't know how much, boys, we can talk about that this morning. Like, we've talked about this on last week's show. We talked about it a lot on the post-game shows, right? Like, I think
last week we never talked about Stanley and Heinola playing as a unit because that wasn't something that happened last week. This is new.
But talking about just Logan Stanley in general.
Well, forget about Stanley then. Let's focus on Heinola. Focus on Heinola being asked to be a right side defenseman. I think the two are related right now
because as far as I'm concerned, it ultimately comes down to Colin Miller. I don't think Logan Stanley's very good. I don't think he's a very good NHL defenseman. The numbers back that up. The eye test backs that up. He's had 150 games of NHL experience. This is not the first time we've seen Logan Stanley in the lineup. I just don't think he's your best option right now on defense. I don't know how much more you want me to elaborate on that. I think Colin Miller is a better option right now than Logan Stanley. The only reason Ville Heinola is playing on the right side is because you have Logan Stanley on the left side. If it was obviously Miller who's a right shot, it would be Heinola and Miller.
Right.
So I mean, but if you're talking I think it's not putting Heinola in the best position to succeed.
Yeah, I mean, and that to me. And I don't know anybody that would say this is, the best for Ville Heinola. And I understand that what's best, that the coaching staff and the organization is focused on what's best for the team, not necessarily what's best for the individual player. I get all that, but I have trouble believing, Dave, that they believe that this is the best for the organization. I know what you're saying about seeing what they have, but I just don't know how much more you need to see. Why not try Ville Heinola? Not even try. Why not give runway to Heinola and Miller and give them that 10 games? Treat him sort of like you treated Dylan Samberg when he was entering the NHL, where you play him in those sheltered minutes, but he was a regular. He was a fixture on, in a position where he can succeed. it seems like the Jets are trying to almost, I mean, I'm sure they're not doing it deliberately or maliciously, but they're making it a harder hill to climb for Ville Heinola, Dave.
Look, Drew, as Nate Schmidt told me many years ago when he got up to Washington as a left shot defenseman and there was no room on the left side. And they said, can you play on the right side? He said, sure. I mean, it's the NHL. You're going to go and you're going to try and play Ezzy wherever you can. I mean, that's the bottom line. The bottom line is it optimal for Ville Heinola to play on his offside? No. And as the comment from AJ said, he's capable of doing it. So, I mean, again, like I said,
Big
to me,
difference between doing it in Finland and doing it at the NHL level.
I'm not saying otherwise, but I mean, he did it a little bit with the Moose. But the fact of the matter is that at the end of the day, if this is your path to have an NHL regular job, you're just going to do whatever it is that you're going to do to keep that job. So, like I said, I just think that the Jets are in the evaluation process right now with these two. Look, the experiment might last one more game. It could last 2 more games. We know it'll probably last today because we saw the lines via Ken Wiebe of the Winnipeg Free Press, which are, of course, on illegalcurve.com if you want to check that out in the practice report or in the pregame report, which will post in about half an hour. I mean, those will have, we saw that it's going to be Heinola and Stanley again today. So we'll see it. Like I said, it's going to be 3, 4, 5 games. And then the team will be able to say, look, we evaluated them at the NHL level. This is what we were able to take away from it. And I think it's valuable for the organization because they're the ones who have to say, this is what we are going to be able to move forward with or not.
Do you put any stock into the idea? Because I've seen it a couple times in the chat, and you know how much we love the chat and we love the participation, but I tend to disagree with them on this point. But do you put any stock that the Jets are showcasing Logan Stanley, for other teams around the league? Because I have trouble believing. I know he's big, but I have trouble believing that there's 31 other teams who are sitting here, salivating at the opportunity to trade for Logan Stanley.
If Jacob Trouba, I realize it was a salary dump and they signed Igor Shesterkin right after, but
right.
if you're talking about what his trade value is, a 4th round draft pick,
is it even that high?
A 5th round draft pick? Like, I don't think his trade value is very high.
Right. And I don't think that, showcasing him, quote unquote.
So you're showcasing him to get a 4th round or 5th round draft pick?
I'm not sure that he's
I don't think to answer your question, I don't think that they're showcasing him.
Yeah.
I think that Logan Stanley at this point in the lineup, it's puzzling to me why he's in the lineup when you have Colin Miller, who's played well this year. I think he's second on the team in expected goals against. So again, they're continuing to try Logan Stanley on that 3rd pair. Like Dave said, they want to see how Logan Stanley and Ville Heinola play together. And I guess we'll just have to, keep watching it.
Let's talk about the other D pairings because it's not just the bottom pair. Though we've certainly focused a lot, and a lot of Jets Nation has focused a lot about the bottom pair defense. But we had the change with Morrissey. We're used to him being with DeMello for so often that he's now playing with Neil Pionk. At least he was against Buffalo, and he likely will be. Certainly the start tonight. And then Hayden Fleury and Dylan DeMello is more of a. That's certainly not going to get a lot of offense from that second pairing of Fleury and DeMello. But what do you think of the switch of moving Morrissey and Pionk, your 2 best puck movers, to playing on the same D pairing to start in Buffalo and moving forward to Chicago, Ezzy?
I love it. And I think you probably wouldn't see it if Dylan Samberg was in the lineup. I think most people would agree with that. But I think that because we saw Hayden Fleury struggle a little bit on the road trip, it makes a lot of sense to have Dylan DeMello kind of stabilize him a little bit more. Let's be honest, Neil Pionk, sometimes he can be a little bit chaotic in his own zone, and he's obviously having a great year. I'm not taking anything away from that, but I think that the main reason why that was done is to improve the defensive play of that second pair, and I think it worked against Buffalo. So I think, yeah, I mean, until Samberg comes back, I wouldn't be surprised if those D pairs stay together for a while.
Just to sort of so that Hayden Fleury, who is certainly being asked to play at a higher level, Dave, than he's typically used to playing. This is a guy who's been a tweener, bottom pairing guy, usually at his ceiling. Now he's being asked to play top 4 minutes, for the Jets. You think that just DeMello is sort of the safety blanket, based on what Ezzy was saying there, that's sort of the concept now, is that because Pionk is a little too erratic, he can't be the safety blanket for Hayden Fleury, whereas DeMello, you sort of know what you're going to expect. He hasn't been great this year, but you know what to expect from Dylan DeMello more than you sort of can from the wild card that is Neil Pionk.
Yeah, I definitely think it's fair. And yeah, Dylan DeMello has been a little more chaotic. He's been a little more Neil Pionkish this year with some of his decision making, but we know what he is ultimately. And yeah, he is a bit of a stabilizing force. And look, I've said before, I like Hayden Fleury in that third pairing role. I think he's being asked to do a little bit much on the second pair, but there's nothing you can do because you don't really have another option right now that they feel comfortable, I should say, using. Now, if Ville Heinola had been healthy all season long, maybe he could have been a left side option alongside either Neil Pionk or Dylan DeMello. But ultimately, yeah, I mean, I like the change. And look, Josh Morrissey can show that he can play with anyone. He was just incredible what he did in Buffalo at the end of that shift, right, boys, to win, to basically set up the winner in overtime. But I do like the fact, and we talked about it previously. Today, I'll be honest with you, I thought we were going to be talking about Jacob Trouba stabilizing things, and Jacob Trouba being paired with Dylan DeMello, and then how with Josh Morrissey, sorry, and how it shifts everything down. But
yeah, because that contract really fits into the Jets' salary cap.
Well, there's a little bit. They'd have to have a third party. Maybe a Columbus would take on some salary if that was the case.
What was Trouba making? $9 million?
$8 million, I think, for the next couple of years.
Yeah. Horrible contract.
2 more years at $8 million. Yeah, it's
not
a great contract, but
look, he's going to live the good life in Anaheim for the next couple of years where there's no pressure. Nobody will pay attention to him or the team whatsoever.
It's great for him for sure.
Yeah, and he'll get to live in California for a couple of years. Not so bad. He'll survive that hardship pretty well, I think.
Yeah. So I mean, but ultimately, getting back to your question, Drew, is just I do like the shifting of the pairs because look, the Jets needed to make some changes. They weren't getting it done, and it wasn't just offensively where they kind of stopped scoring. It was the fact that their D wasn't playing consistently enough, and so maybe kind of removing that stagnation, that familiarity, and changing things up a little bit. And again, like I said, DeMello, for all of some of his flaws, he is kind of that stabilizing force. And I think Hayden Fleury, a guy who, again, like I said, is being asked to do more than I think we expected of him when he signed the deal. This way you give him a guy, it's kind of like when a thoroughbred is going to the on the track and is going to the gate. They have the little ponies beside thoroughbred to calm it down. Dylan DeMello is like that little pony. He's a little pony. So who would have thought immigrants had a pony? But ultimately, I think he'll be good.
I was wondering how much one of us is the pony for the other one. That's the burning question. Which of the three of us? I
got bad news for you, Drew. You're the dog meat.
I got sent to the glue factory.
You've been sent to the factory.
All I know is I'm not interested in any of Drew's pony cosplay that he's trying to stir up here.
That was Dave. It wasn't me.
I was talking about horse racing. Come on, we've got a long tradition in this province of horse racing. Come on.
And the Manouk family has a long tradition of horse ownership. That's really where we're at. Yeah. Let me ask you guys this question. At the beginning of the year, before the season started, the big question for the Jets was, the right side of the defense. Who's going to fill in? Who's going to be the right side? What's it going to look like? Do the Jets need to upgrade? The right side. History has shown us that Kevin Cheveldayoff, when he thinks his team is good, will go out and make an acquisition. At the trade deadline last year, was at the All-Star break. Who knows? Sometime in the next couple of months, history has shown that Kevin Cheveldayoff will be aggressive to try and improve the Winnipeg Jets. Right now, assume Dylan Samberg comes back and he's healthy. Right now, is it left side or right side, D, that he's most interested in acquiring, from your opinion, Ezzy?
Yeah, it's a good question. I would say it's probably the left side, to be honest with you. I mean, I maybe I'm higher on Colin Miller than other people are, but I mean, I think he's done an admirable job on that third pair on the right side. I think even Miller's a guy that can move up and play on your second pair and give you, comparable play to Neil Pionk. So I would say right now in the summer, I would agree the right side was more of an issue, but then you throw in a guy like Dylan Coghlan. Dylan Coghlan played one game against the Vegas Golden Knights, and I thought he showed really well. Like, again, we're not talking about Dylan Coghlan's not going to make Team USA at the Four Nations tournament. He's not going to, put up 50 points in the season, although he put up 40 points in the AHL last year. But I would say the left side. And again, we're talking about bolstering your team for a long Stanley Cup run. Like, I think Hayden Fleury, on a really good team is a seventh defenseman. That's what I would say Hayden Fleury is. I think
Yeah.
he's done a really good job filling in on the third pair. But I think that if you're looking at, where on the defense you could really improve, because it's really unfortunate. I think really, guys, we're seeing Dylan Samberg, and I've said this before, you could argue he's the second best defenseman on the team after Josh Morrissey. I realize
Second
a lot of
most
people
valuable for
well,
sure.
right. And it shows you when a player like him, and same thing with Nikolai Ehlers. We talked about this after Ehlers got injured. When players like this get injured, there's a domino effect, right? Because on the second line now, Lambert obviously comes in and plays center, but the driver of the line is Ehlers.
Mhm.
So now you have to reorganize a bunch of, it's not just one line that you have to manage, it's several lines. So I would probably say the left side, to be honest with you. And, I haven't done a deep dive into, which left side defenseman, the Jets could target. Obviously, as we get closer to the trade deadline, I'm sure there's going to be several left side defensemen or right side defensemen for that matter. But I think a lot of people, guys, are going to call for the Jets to acquire a top 4 or even top pairing defenseman. But what we know is those are really hard to acquire at the trade deadline. Just look at a guy like Chris Tanev. I believe that was a first-round pick that was given up by Dallas, or it was a high draft pick.
I think it was
So are you going to give up a first-round pick to get a top pairing defenseman? Maybe. But I think for me, and this kind of dovetails into what I was just talking about with Brad Lambert, to me going forward, the 2C is still a bigger question mark for me, because I think Vlad Nemesnikov has done a nice job, but I just don't think he provides enough offense for what you want out of a second line center. That's just my opinion. But I think I would say left side defenseman is the bigger need.
Okay, so it sort of shifted then from the training camp, in that it was, for the longest time, it was sort of the right side. Well,
and I should mention, guys, that if Ville Heinola progresses like we want him to, then I don't think you need a left side defenseman. But that's why it goes back to what I said before. To me, it's pretty obvious that you have Heinola and Colin Miller as your third pair. That's your best option as a third pair. Right now, obviously, they're going with the Logan Stanley experiment. But if Heinola progresses, Dave, and evolves into what we think he's going to be a couple months from now, then you don't really have to acquire a left side defenseman, or maybe you just acquire a depth defenseman. But you've already got Hayden Fleury and Dylan Coghlan. So how many 7th, 8th defensemen do you really need?
No, I look, in an ideal world, I actually think still the right side, simply because I do agree with Ezzy. I think that Colin Miller has been fantastic. I just worry about the top pairing. I just think that if you could have Josh Morrissey with a true 1A, 1A, 1B, or 1 and 1A D pairing, like a Mackenzie Weegar type guy who's going to be a little bit of an upgrade over, not a little bit, an upgrade over Dylan DeMello, and then that idea of shifting guys down to create like a Dylan DeMello, Dylan Samberg pairing, and then ultimately have Neil Pionk. It's just more about depth.
How realistic is that, though, Dave?
It's not.
How many times have the Jets acquired a top pairing right side defenseman? Never.
How many times do any teams really do it?
That's what I'm saying.
I agree. It's not realistic. I'm saying that if you're looking at what your wants are, what your needs are, I would say that. But I think, if anything, what this is exposed, and ultimately at the end of the day, and I guess kind of the point I was trying to get to make is, if you had DeMello or Pionk, go down or whatever, I think Colin Miller could more than admirably step in and play that role if needed. He's a veteran. He knows what it takes. And then, but where I'm concerned right now with the Jets is definitely the left side, because we're seeing you lose one of either Josh Morrissey or Dylan Samberg, and it's become kind of chaotic on that left side. And again, Hayden Fleury, admirable what he's trying to do, but he's in over his head a lot of times on that second pairing. So you definitely need, I think, to augment that second. And remember, let's be realistic here also. You also have to think of what is in the pipeline. On the right-hand side, you've got Elias Salamonson, who we'll talk about later in the game, took a real bad hit
last night.
Yeah, got crushed. He did not look good. We'll talk about that later. But ultimately, I'm talking about in terms of long-term, that's kind of your right side, Elias Salamonson, even Simon Lundmark, if you got to look an extended look at training camp. But on the left side, you don't have that. Dmitry Kuzmin is still, years away. So to me, if you're not blocking someone, that's the biggest concern with the Jets when we talk about the Jets like this. And for years, it was always like, well, get this guy. Well, the problem is you have a guy who's a year or two away by getting a guy who's on a 3 or 4 year deal, you create blockage. We saw it with Brendan Dillon. We saw it with Nate Schmidt. So what you don't want to do is create that organizationally. I think from the right side perspective, unless I guess my point is if you're not going to get a right side guy who's top pairing, which they're not going to get, let's be clear, then you focus on the left side. You get someone to augment that third pairing. I think that's why they've got Heinola doing what he's doing and seeing how comfortable he is on the right. They know what he can do on the left, and then just seeing how flexible he is. And like I said, we'll see how much longer this experiment lasts. But I would augment the left side, not the right side.
Well, let me throw out this name because, again, you have to have, there's lots of, rentals, but a lot of those rentals might be on teams that are good.
Sounds like Drew's been fishing.
Well, Marcus Pettersson is the name that comes to mind from the Pittsburgh Penguins.
Yeah, he's been mentioned. A lot of Jets fans wanted them to just, when he went to Pittsburgh, just take him and bring him home.
He is a rental. I mean, he's young. I mean, he's only 28. So, I mean, obviously.
Apparently you and AJ are reading the same reports there, Drew.
Well, there you go. I mean, this is a guy, Pittsburgh's not going anywhere. You know what the cost
is going down.
Be. Yeah, they're going.
The Jets have loved what Marcus Pettersson's done with the Penguins this year. They're doing great.
Well, but he's on a terrible team. He's possession positive at the very least. So it does say, that speaks.
He's an okay defenseman.
Yeah. He's an okay defenseman. Exactly. Yeah. He's not a superstar, but he's improving your team on the back end. And really, there's not that many guys, who are pure rentals, because let's assume that that's who the Jets are likely going to be acquiring, because that's really all they've ever acquired via trade, leading up to the deadline. There was always guys who were pending unrestricted free agents. They happened to sign a guy like Dylan DeMello longer term, but he was pending UFA. I mean, it's just a guy that seems like, if you had to pick a player who's pending, who's pending free agency, there could be a fit there. A lot of the other guys are still on good teams who probably aren't going anywhere. It's like the Jets trading Nikolai Ehlers. It's unlikely to happen because they still see themselves as a good team moving forward. That's just the name that I think a lot of people are interested in, and it sort of does make a lot of sense for how he could help out the Winnipeg Jets. He could fill in a role on the Winnipeg Jets and improve the entirety of the defense as well. I mean, all of a sudden you move that, everybody's going down a little bit, or you're figuring things out. If your left side is Morrissey, and then it's Pettersson, and then it's, Samberg in some variety when he's healthy, well, you've got something that you're building pretty decently on your left side, I think, in that case. I
like Samberg as a second pairing. I don't think
so then Pettersson can be your third pairing.
Yeah, no, I know what you're saying, Drew. It's an improvement over what you've got. I think Samberg fits in really nicely as your second pairing defenseman, and the numbers back it up, right?
I'm fine.
We don't have to go over the numbers, but I think ultimately everything comes down to, does Ville Heinola progress? Because obviously he's only had 3 games this year, 4 games this year, whatever it is.
Yeah.
So I think they're still in like Dave said, they're still in the evaluation period with Heinola. Then to me, if you're not sure about Heinola on the third pair, then maybe you acquire a quote unquote top 4 defenseman. But then, so I think that, it all kind of, for me, depends on Heinola, because I still have very high hopes for him. I think he's got a high ceiling, and, we'll see what happens, but it's definitely something to monitor. And like you said, Drew, in previous years when the Jets have been a top team, which they obviously are this year, Chevy has not been afraid to make moves before the trade deadline. So I would expect, again, we're looking 3 months in advance here, boys, but I would expect him to address 2C and probably bring in 1 or 2 defensemen.
Yeah. And for people who like height, Pettersson's 6'4". So you got that going for you as well. Mike McIntyre set to join us momentarily. We'll come back with Mike. You're live here on the Illegal Curve Hockey Show, presented by Play Now on this Saturday morning edition. Bottom of the hour. Welcome back to the Illegal Curve Hockey Show. Drew Mindell, Dave Minuk, Ezra Ginsburg with you on the Saturday morning. The Jets in Chicago to face the Blackhawks later this afternoon. Illegal Curve post-game show right around 5:30, 5:40 later on this late afternoon, early evening. From the Winnipeg Free Press, we're pleased to welcome to the program Mike McIntyre. I got to say, Mike, you're doing a great job cosplaying as Mike O'Shea with that big sort of red beard with a little bit of the gray in there. I like it. In case the Bombers head coach needs a body double, you can fill in there.
I'm not shaving until we win a Grey Cup again. Could be a while.
Fair enough.
By the way, Mike, did you have Drew saying cosplay on your bingo card for today's Illegal Curve Hockey Show?
I did not. And also when he said, I wasn't sure if he said bottom of the hour or bottom of the barrel in terms of describing the next guest here.
I said hour.
The bottom of the hour. Okay.
Yeah,
I can live with that.
Just for the record, I want to say hour. Mike, we'll get into the nitty-gritty of the Winnipeg Jets, but I want to start with your feature that's in today's edition of the Winnipeg Free Press. It was online last night. I had the opportunity to read it last night, and it's my wife's actually reading it upstairs in the Dead Tree edition of the Free Press. We're subscribers. We get the hard copy on Saturdays.
Thank you for your support.
Yeah, it's my pleasure. Keeping you up in the air as you travel and crisscross the North America following the Winnipeg Jets. But really, the words unsung heroes is sort of what comes to mind in reading that feature as you delve deep into what goes into keeping a team like the Winnipeg Jets on the road, keeping them, fit and healthy and in the hotel rooms and everything else. Just a real great feature. Maybe sort of give the broad strokes of it for those in our audience who haven't yet had the chance to delve deep into it.
Yeah, I mean, we obviously focus a lot on the team that's on the ice, and it kind of struck me that there's an entire team behind the team, if you will, that doesn't get the headlines, doesn't show up in the standings or the statistics. And I just thought, a season-long 6-game road trip over 11 days and 3 time zones was a perfect chance to kind of spend a little bit of time with the team behind the team, get to know them a little bit better and kind of profile the work that they put in to kind of move the Jets from point A, in this case, to A to B to C to D to E to F. Everything from loading the equipment and rushing to the airport and loading and unloading the plane, the getting to and from hotels and rinks, a little bit about how the players spend some of the free time they have. It was, it was really interesting. And, we know some of the faces, those of us who are like you guys around the rink. But I think the general public doesn't necessarily know how it all works. And, the other thing that struck me, guys, like I think we can all relate maybe to our own, whether it was when we were playing hockey or if we coached our kids or whatever, the time away when you were at, road trips or out of town tournaments, like, those are often some of the best times where you make a lot of memories. And I wanted to kind of dig into what time away from home means to players, coaches, and support staff. It's a time for bonding, for, making memories, that sort of thing. So this trip, and in fact, the whole stretch of travel recently, I thought was the perfect chance to kind of dig into that a little bit. This is a pretty incredible stretch of travel that the Jets have had. And I guess this is the flip side, guys, to seemingly spending all of January at home as they're going to do. They had to pay for it early. Today, it's hard to believe, but today is the 14th straight game that these guys will get on a plane after the game. That's 14 straight where they're never playing in the same city once. I did the math that this will have covered over a 29-day stretch going back to November the 9th, when those 14 games began. They have flown 29,000 kilometers in that span. So it's been a grueling stretch for sure. Good thing for them. They banked a lot of early points because I think it has very much started to take a toll. And I got a sense of that, just being around the team on the road for so long. You just got the sense of how much this is wearing on everybody. But it's a really fascinating group. It's one of the smallest in the league. Like the Jets, they're a small market team, and they have a pretty small hockey ops staff as well. But I think at the end of the day, you can conclude it's small but mighty, the job these guys do, and it's very much appreciated by the players.
And Mike, I echo what Drew said. I'm about halfway through the article. I was trying to read it this morning before the show, and so I'm only halfway through it. But it's a great read. And you meant, like, obviously you go into the the equipment staff, Jason McMaster, Al Pritchard, the hands man, if you will. And I wanted to just ask you, like, in preparing this article and doing all of the research and all of the interviews and the writing, just everything that goes into putting together a long form article like this, what surprised you the most about, like you said, the team behind the team? Because I agree with you. that's what stands out to me. That's the best about this article, is that people are getting like a firsthand glimpse of really what really kind of the fuel of this team.
Yeah. Well, I learned a few things that, quite frankly, I was surprised by, and I think people might be surprised by. First of all, this speaks to how fast these guys work after the game. And, you know, if we're down outside the room, whether even at home here, if they're leaving, rarely do they go somewhere right after a game in Winnipeg here, unless they're playing the very next night on the road. But on the road, you know, I see these guys just flying around like literally minutes after the game ended, loading bags onto the truck. And what I didn't realize, they aim to be in the air on their charter exactly 4 hours after puck drop. That is an incredible turnaround.
That's quick.
You know, when you consider a hockey game takes about 2.5 hours, like they're leaving themselves basically a 90-minute window from the end of the game, the final buzzer, to get everything. And they have, I think they told me it was 4,700 kilograms of baggage, and like,
10,000 pounds.
Yeah, it's an insane amount of baggage, and the fact that these guys are loading and unloading it in 90 minutes, and also getting through customs and getting them on the plane, like that is a crazy turnaround. Another thing I didn't realize in talking to the equipment guys, the average player is replacing his skates every 8 to 10 games. They have to bring all kinds of extra, especially on a long road trip like this. Almost the whole team is going to turn over their skates. That's how quick these guys cycle them out. Same with gloves. So they go through sticks and gloves at a pretty rapid rate. You know, one thing that helps if you're the Jets, and Chris Kreviazek is their team services director. He kind of, you know, when the schedule comes out in the summer, he starts putting a plan into action, working with the head coach on, okay, when are we going to stay over? When are we getting to practice? When do we want our days off? Like, so they map out the whole schedule over the summer, obviously subject to change. But one thing that helps guys is Chris told me that in a given year, so you got 31 road cities, typically about 28 of those 31 cities, they'll stay in the same hotel, they'll use the same bus, like everything remains the same. So familiarity certainly helps, and he's been in this job for a long time. But it is interesting, and I didn't realize this either, guys. The Jets, because they fly on Air Canada, they have a charter. It's not always the same plane, even on one road trip. The plane gets swapped in and out, because what's fascinating is Air Canada services, I believe it's 11 NHL teams, and they have 4 specialized planes that are kind of zipping in and out to service those 11 teams. So it's almost like they operate, I guess, in quadrants, if you will, in the US and up in Canada when needed. And these planes, so a plane could take the Jets from point A to B, then maybe go grab another team in point C and take them to D. And then another plane comes in and backfills for the Jets when they're ready to go to their next destination. It's quite an operation. And yeah, it was really interesting to learn a bit about.
Mike, one of those observations that you were making on this bizarro last, almost month is Mark Scheifele. I mean, Mark Scheifele, the center, I think he took 14 faceoffs against the Florida Panthers, then suddenly takes that maintenance day, the fall. I think that was the 19th. So the 20th, he's not at practice. We're told by Scott Arniel, just a maintenance day. Then suddenly he's a winger, and then he's a hybridized winger. And then suddenly now he's back to being a center. And I think he took like 13 or 14 faceoffs the other day. So to me, he looks kind of like back to Mark Scheifele. So maybe they knew what they were talking about and he just needed a few days. What are you seeing from this situation? Because it was very peculiar. Everyone was speculating. And now he seems to be back to Mark Scheifele from before. Maybe not 100%, but a lot more than we saw a few weeks ago.
Well, certainly the other day in Buffalo, he looked very close to 100% to me. Like everything about his game wasn't just the 2 assists or the fact he was taking faceoff. He was just moving faster,
Mhm.
looked more powerful.
Mhm.
Like everything about his game on that road trip, guys, did not look at all normal. And I tried to find some answers. One of the days, I can't remember what city we were in, might have been LA halfway through the trip, but I had a one-on-one with Scheifele, and I did not get very far in terms of trying to find out what was going on. It was interesting. It almost became a running joke with him and Scott O'Neill, like just to slough it off and say, oh, well, Gabe Vilardi's really good at faceoffs. But then Gabe Vilardi stopped taking faceoffs, even when once Nikolai Ehlers got hurt and they called Brad Lambert up, and all of a sudden now Vilardi's not even taking faceoffs, but neither is Scheifele. So that excuse kind of blew up. Whatever it was, clearly they felt he couldn't do any more damage to, and B, he could play through and it would get better. And I think that has certainly proven to be the case. Now, you just look at that road trip, guys. Like, he took 2 faceoffs in Pittsburgh, 2 in Nashville, and then none in the remaining 4 games on the trip. He had 2 assists in the entire road trip. They were both secondary assists on empty net goals. He was barely shooting the puck. That's another thing. I think he had 9 total shots in the 6 games. And when he did shoot the puck, it looked like there was nothing behind it. So, I think, look, nobody was really any good against St. Louis, that home game the other night. But I thought the Buffalo game was a significant step for him. Obviously, he's back to now playing center. And I know there's that theory out there. People are going to say, oh, it was all Team Canada related. He was trying to audition as a winger. No, that's not what was happening. Maybe the timing of it potentially worked out in that way, I guess. But again, if he was auditioning, wasn't much of an audition given the way he was playing. No, he was battling through an injury, which they didn't want to disclose. Fair enough. Whether it's 100% healed or 90 or 80, whatever the case, he certainly looks more like the old Mark Scheifele.
Mike McIntyre is our guest Saturday morning, the Illegal Curve Hockey Show, presented by our friends at Play Now. The Jets are in action this afternoon against the Chicago Blackhawks. And the second line center for the Winnipeg Jets this afternoon will be Brad Lambert yet again, as he's been filling in and playing with the big club ever since Nikolai Ehlers was put on the IR when the Jets returned to Winnipeg. How would you assess Brad Lambert's performance so far? Hasn't really been on the score sheet, but how would you assess him as an NHL regular for the last few games?
Yeah, I think he's been fine. Again, Tuesday was a tough to grade anybody, really, because the whole team, there wasn't a whole lot happening there. But the other day, certainly noticed his speed. That's one thing, guys, as that road trip was going on, and certainly at the end, the last 2 games, I just thought the Jets looked really slow. And, they could use, and that's because they were all skating on heavy legs, no doubt. But, throw Ville Heinola back in the lineup, add Brad Lambert. And I thought the other day in Buffalo, like, that was the quickest the Jets had looked in a couple weeks. And, obviously they're always going to look slower when you don't have Nikolai Ehlers, because he is a dynamic player. And, when he's on, he does special things. But certainly Brad Lambert, I thought that was a really nice game he had against the Sabres. Obviously, he's going to get a chance now to build on these games. And, I don't know exactly when Nikolai Ehlers is back. The schedule kind of continues to be unrelenting here, guys, and that it's just every second day. And in the case of this weekend, both days, they don't get more than a day off until after next weekend, when they have those couple of days off before they head down to California for a back-to-back. So practice time is pretty limited. Is Nikolai Ehlers back at all over the next week? I don't know the answer to that. But, I think it's fair to say Brad Lambert stays in the lineup at least until Nikolai Ehlers is back. And if he could have a really nice showing in that time, maybe he forces the coaches to consider some other options.
Right.
And I just think Brad Lambert's going to get better with each game as he gets a little more confidence here. And, so it'll be fun to watch him today and again tomorrow. And I suspect we're going to get to see him probably most of, if not all of this coming week and the entire homestand, because I don't know that Nikolai Ehlers is going to be ready to play.
Well, that's what I was going to ask, Mike, and you alluded to it. If he performs well, if he shows well, Brad Lambert, is this an opportunity, even when Ehlers is back, is this an opportunity for him to stay at the NHL level? Sort of be done with the AHL development side of his game and begin to, get more miles at the NHL level, albeit in maybe different roles up and down the lineup, given given potential different line mates and the different scenarios that the Jets are facing.
I really do think it is that opportunity. And, the obvious one, I suppose, that the move the Jets could make would be to move a guy like Vlad Namestnikov down to the fourth line. Again, these are, the fourth line's been really good though, but I would file this under good problems to have. And inevitably the Jets are probably going to run into some more injuries here. But we know a guy like Namestnikov, it doesn't matter where you put him, he can make that line better. So yeah, I mean, personally, I'd love to see what a Lambert, Ehlers, Perfetti trio could potentially look like. Will we get to see that? Remains to be seen. But certainly if you're Brad Lambert, acquitting yourself well in what is probably going to end up being a bit of an extended audition here due to injury, is certainly good for him. And hey, worst case scenario, they say, you know what? We kind of like what we have in our top six right now, Brad. Great job by you. You're going to be back here sooner than later again. Then you hope he goes down to the Moose again with even more confidence, knowing that, he didn't get demoted because of his play. He just kind of got squeezed out on a deep team. And I suspect he could live with that. He'd probably be frustrated, sure. But, I think it's incumbent on him to make the most of this opportunity. And it looks like these opportunities are going to keep piling on top of each other here for at least the next few games.
Mike, we were talking about the road trip earlier and Mark Scheifele specifically, and I think you'd agree there were no shortage of players that were struggling. Gabe Vilardi, one of those guys, if I remember correctly, he only had that one goal against LA. And obviously last game against Buffalo, he was fantastic. We talked about it on our post-game show. And that's obviously a good sign for Jets fans and the team, because you can't really have a passenger on your top line. Not saying that he was. But the question I wanted to ask you about Gabe Vilardi is he's obviously a pending RFA. And I was thinking about this quite a bit because I've been focusing on him a little bit more than other players. I mean, I think Neil Pionk, same situation, even though he's a pending UFA. But where Vilardi's at, and obviously, the road trip, his play dipped a little bit, but I think you'd agree, overall, he's having a fantastic season. Like, what kind of contract do you think we're looking at here? Obviously, he's arbitration eligible.
Yeah.
But like, what do you like? Are we talking like, is it possible the Jets open it up for a 7 or 8 year contract? Do you see this being more of kind of like a 4, 5, 6 year deal? Like where do you see that? Because we were in Chicago for the draft in 2017. Like a guy I was kind of looking at as a comparable, forget how many spots, was Owen Tippett, and he was around $6 million, and I think he signed a 7-year deal. Like, do you think that's where this is trending right now?
Well, it's interesting because the cap is being projected to grow maybe even greater than initially predicted, right? And I do wonder, to your point, if you're an NHL agent and you've got a young player who's poised to certainly cash in now, would you be advising that player that you're actually better to take, as you just outlined, like a 4 to 5 year deal, so that you can cash in again in 4 to 5 years? Who knows what the cap will look like then? But the idea that you could be leaving some significant money on the table if you sign an 8-year deal right now. Now, I suspect teams would love to get guys wrapped up for the long term, especially if they feel that they already know what that player is and what his value is to the organization. But yeah, I mean, to your point, I think the Jets would love to get Gabe Vilardi's name on a long-term contract for a couple of reasons. He obviously is a key part of the present. I certainly believe they view him as a key part of the future. He does things that, are unique, that are not easy to replace or replicate. And I also think, in a way, guys, it would almost bring a bit of a sense of closure to the never-ending trade tree going all the way back to Patrick Laine, right? Like the idea of being able to close the books, if you will, and know that you got an impact player who is part of your long-term core, as opposed to, this constant kind of more and more limbs and branches, if you will, on this tree happening. So, yeah, I think it'll be a very interesting negotiation. One thing about Vilardi is, he's had a hard time in the past staying healthy. Knock on wood, good start, very good start this year. Obviously healthy. If he can have a full season this year and put up the kind of numbers that he's certainly on track to put up, certainly looks like a guy that can score 30 and, chip in with probably 30, 35, 40 assists as well. Be close to that point per game range. Like, those guys don't grow on trees. Obviously he's a very good fit with other core pieces they already have in place. And yeah, I mean, I could see the team and the player, because of the cap situation, it may not be an easy negotiation because they may actually have different perspectives on what's best. One thing we do know, though, guys, the money will be there for the Jets. Like, people should not be losing sleep thinking, oh my God, how are they going to sign Gabe Vilardi? Where are they getting that money from? They'll have the money. In fact, I recently saw somebody projected, and this would be far-fetched, but with the cap expected to grow where it is, someone used the data on the I forget the website that projects what the next contracts for pending UFAs would look like. Anyways, they had a synopsis that basically said the Jets might be able to afford re-signing all of their UFAs if they wanted to, and still being cap compliant. And there are RFAs like that. They could get everybody that, if they wanted to run it all back next year with the exact same group they have this year, that there would possibly be a path to do that, which is really interesting, right? Because in the past, we've heard Kevin Cheveldayoff say, well, we'd love to keep everybody, but the reality is, we can't. Well, maybe the reality is this time that they actually could.
Mike, you talk about running it back potentially next year and figuring out what they've got in this group. Right now, they're in a figuring it out sort of situation with Ville Heinola and Logan Stanley. And
yeah.
We spent the first part of the show kind of talking about that. And we had talked about it on the post-game show as to how long that experiment was going to last, the last post-game show. And then Dean Chenoweth talked to Kenny Wiebe yesterday, and Ken was talking about, 7-8 guys, keeping him healthy. And Dean's response to Ken didn't mention Ville Heinola and Logan Stanley specifically, but it was clearly about the two of them and talking about how they wanted to see those guys kind of get a runway.
Right.
From your perspective, does it not make sense for this organization to say, listen, we need to know what we've got in these two so we can decide if we need to move on or make a trade or da-da-da-da-da. And this way they get of them. And then from your perspective also, what sort of runway are we talking about? Are we talking this today will be game 3 of that duo? Will it be 4, 5, 6 games? Will it be 10? What do you think?
Yeah, it's interesting. And I found Dean's answer yesterday to Kenny in Chicago a really interesting one, because I think it gives a glimpse into the mindset right now of the organization. Like, I really like Dylan Coghlan the one game he saw, but then he was out of the lineup, right? Mm-hmm. Not performance related at all. If it was just based on performance, there's no chance the Jets could argue that they've been more impressed with what Logan Stanley's done the last few games than what Dylan Coghlan brought them, or even what Colin Miller has brought them during his time in the lineup. The safe play right now would be to put Miller and Coghlan in as your third pair. And and have Hanola and Stanley be your 7 and 8. But the Jets are not going the safe play. They're paying deference right now to their drafted and developed young defensemen in Stanley and Hanola. And, there's some growing pains with that, especially with both guys and their backgrounds. Villi's barely played over the last 2 years because of injuries. Logan Stanley coming back off an injury that cost him 3 weeks. And obviously he can be a very polarizing player because of some of the things he does or doesn't do on the ice. So I think the Jets' hot start to the year, their current place in the standings, and the Dylan Samberg injury, coupled with Hayden Fleury stepping in. And I think, guys, we would all agree Hayden Fleury's done a tremendous job in taking on elevated minutes here. He's not Dylan Samberg, but he's certainly helped steady that second pair in the loss of Samberg. So I think the Jets realize that they do need to see what they have in these two young guys, even if there's going to be some games where it maybe doesn't look that great. And mistakes are going to be made, obviously, as a third pair, especially when you get back home, as they will for 4 straight after today. You can try and shelter those guys a little bit more than you can on the road, where maybe they get exposed. But yeah, I think the runway, Dave, is a significant one here for both, because Dylan Samberg's not coming back anytime soon. And I just think certainly over a guy like Dylan Coghlan, who was probably not even supposed to be here. If everybody had been healthy at a camp, he would have been with the Moose. Like, no offense to Dylan Coghlan, but I just think they're, of course, going to give their own guys a longer look than they will kind of a journeyman that they signed just simply for depth. The Miller one is interesting to me because, he's a guy, obviously, with the shot. He's put up some numbers already this year. But now with Stanley and Hanola both healthy, he's getting pinched out. And so, yeah, I mean, we'll see what this looks like. I do think that duo are probably going to stay together for a little while here. And you hope that both of them can use the repetition that they're going to get and use that to build some confidence and hopefully some better play on the ice.
Last question for you, Mike. Mike McIntyre of the Winnipeg Free Press, our guest this morning on the Illegal Curve Hockey Show. 3 Winnipeg Jets players named to Team Canada. 2 teams in the 4 Nations Cup, right, to be more accurate. Kyle Connor and Connor Hellebuyck, of course, for Team USA. Josh Morrissey for Team Canada. Obviously, those players are thrilled for the opportunity. Obviously, other players are disappointed that they won't get the same chance. Do you think that this is a tournament that those guys can sort of use as a further springboard for the stretch run of the rest of the regular season? Or do you think it's going to be something that actually hampers them, given that they will have to play those additional games rather than getting rest like so many of the other players in and around the league?
No, I think I think it can be used as fuel for sure. Like, look at Mark Scheifele. If there was any concern that he was going to be, in pout mode after getting left off Team Canada, I think he put that notion to rest with a really strong game. The first game after the official announcement was made was a really good one. Same with Adam Lowry. Not that I'd ever expect Adam Lowry. I mean, I think Adam Lowry recognized that he was probably a long shot at best.
Yeah.
Look at who the best players were the other night in Buffalo. All the leaders, they led. Morrissey was great. Lowry was great. Scheifele was great. Obviously Hellebuyck was great. Like, that's a really good sign. I'm sure those guys, Lowry and Scheifele would be disappointed. I do think Mark Scheifele, I think there's still an outside chance he goes, guys, because I think he's got to be very high on the injury replacement list. Like, he might be number 1. If not number 1, I got to think he's like number 2. And there's probably going to be a guy that gets banged up between now and then, and it's a short tournament. So, I assume if a guy is iffy, they're going to err on the side of replacing him. And the other thing is there's the Olympics too. And if you're Mark Scheifele, to a lesser degree, Adam Lowry, but if you're Mark Scheifele especially, use this as a chance to, if you can just keep going on now, lead your team. Jets are still one of the best teams in the NHL. You're the number one center on that team. Team success, individual success, that's going to get noticed. And so that door is not closed. It's not entirely closed on the Four Nations. It's certainly not closed on the Olympics, which, no offense to the Four Nations, the Olympics are really where it's at for these guys. I think it's a good thing to get a little bit of rest for sure. Mark Scheifele can now go lay, assuming he doesn't get brought in as a replacement, he can go lay on a beach somewhere for a week. That's probably not the worst thing, guys, if the Jets want to have the kind of playoff run that they envision. Get a healthy, rested, and slightly motivated, extra motivated Mark Scheifele. That's not a bad thing at all in my books.
Sorry, Drew. I just wanted to say one thing. One thing I'm sure, Mike, that you were also getting a kick of that I found fascinating was you look at like Team Canada's snub list or Team USA's snub list. Like, I think that those snub teams could go toe to toe with the actual team, right? Like, just looking at Team Canada, right? Like, no Connor Bedard, no Mark Scheifele, no Zach Hyman, no Evan Bouchard. Yeah, John Tavares, Steven Stamkos. I mean, the list goes on and on and on. Like,
there are snubs to the snub team.
Adam Lowry was a snub on the snub team, wasn't he, Mike?
That's the most Canadian thing ever, that people are getting upset about why a guy was snubbed from the snub list.
Unfortunately, though, there's no goaltenders on either of the snub list. That's the problem for Team Canada.
No, exactly. That was, that's going to be interesting to see. And I don't know how they remedy that by the Olympics either, guys. I mean, the hope is that someone just gets, lightning in a bottle, if you will, and gets red hot. But yeah, that's definitely an area of weakness. No concerns for the Americans, of course. Oh, I guess they could try and find a way to get Connor Hellebuck his Canadian passport between now and the Olympics.
Well, I was kind of thinking that, right? Like, he's lived in Winnipeg for how long now, right? Like, does he have his citizenship? If he doesn't, someone should get on that.
I think, isn't it once you play internationally for one country, you can't go back and play for another?
I do think that's the case because weren't they having that debate with Joey Decord, which again, that's the state. That's how poor Canadian goaltending is, that there was almost a national referendum over whether Joey Decord is Canadian or American, to which I would say, does it really matter? But apparently it did.
Well, now you've made enemies in Seattle, Mike, but that's okay. You're loved here in Winnipeg and on the Illegal Curve.
Here's a blast from the past, Mike. Maybe we'll ask Peter Nedved that question. Remember Peter Nedved played for Team Canada, even though he was Czech.
I do, yes.
Right? Mike, thank you. We'll let you get on with your Saturday. We'll see you at the rink tomorrow for the Jets and the Blue Jackets, but enjoy the Jets and the Blackhawks later on this afternoon.
Have a great day, guys.
Cheers, Mike.
There he goes, Mike
Thanks,
McIntyre, our good friend, joining us this morning on the Illegal Curve Hockey Show, presented by Play Now. Always great to catch up with Mike. When we come back, more on the Jets and the Blackhawks, and then Charlie Remuliotis joins us at the bottom of the hour to talk more about the Jets' opponent this afternoon. Drew Mindell, Dave Minuk, Ezra Ginsburg. It's a Play Now Saturday here on the Illegal Curve Hockey Show.
We want to thank you for not betting with Play Now and choosing our illegal gambling sites instead.
Because we couldn't afford things like this without your money.
So much of your money.
Now you might have questions like,
do our profits benefit your community?
No.
Or bet with Play Now, Manitoba's local legal and secure gambling site.
Dining, entertainment, parking, and convenience, all in one spot. City Place is located in the heart of downtown Winnipeg, attached to the Canada Life Centre. Whether you're working, living, or out for a night in the downtown, make City Place your go-to destination before or after the fun finds you. Lunchtime, game time, anytime. Visit City Place at 333 St. Mary Avenue, next to Canada Life Centre. Holt Dental, the new official dentist of Illegal Curve, has a philosophy rooted in 2 unyielding principles: genuinely caring about patients and providing outstanding service. Being a patient of Holt Dental means more than just checkups and treatments. It's taking the time to listen and talk to each patient so they can achieve the best long-term health, functionality, and aesthetics for their teeth, mouth, and gums. Conveniently located at Grant Park Festival on Taylor Avenue, Holt Dental is dentistry of the highest quality in a comfortable and relaxed environment. For more information, visit holtdental.ca. Oh, and there's plenty of free parking at the front door, too. Celebrating its 40th year as Winnipeg's home for stand-up comedy, Rumors Restaurant and Comedy Club has recently been named Canada's top comedy club and a top 5 comedy club in North America. From birthday parties to date nights to fundraisers and everything in between, Rumors is your destination for the best and most affordable live entertainment Winnipeg has to offer. For more information on upcoming shows, Rumors' incredible promotions, and to purchase tickets, visit rumorscomedyclub.com.
So you're a pizza person, you married a wing person, but somehow your kids are salad people. You can't pick your fam, but you can pick your BP meal deal. Starting from $18.99 for takeout or delivery at bostonpizza.com.
10 minutes after the top of the hour, hour number 2 has already started, but rolls on here on the Illegal Curve Hockey Show. Drew Mandel, Dave Minuk, Ezra Ginsburg. Want to remind everybody, Tuesday, the Jets and the Boston Bruins will do battle at 7 o'clock Central Time in downtown Winnipeg. At 12 noon, we'll be live at City Place, another edition, special edition of the Illegal Curve Hockey Show, previewing the Jets and the Bruins. Spend your lunch hour with us at City Place coming up on Tuesday. If it's anything like last time, you never know who's going to walk by. Hopefully, we're not going to be chirping Brad Marchand as he walks by and then delivers a bit of a cross-check to us, like we were talking about the Panthers last game, and head coach Paul Maurice and some of the other Panthers were walking by as we were doing the show at the same time.
Did you boys see the back and forth between Brad Marchand and Biz Nasty?
It was amazing. I mean,
so good.
First of all, Paul Bissonnette, is sort of lucky to have escaped as unscathed as he did. I mean, if you missed
Drew,
it,
he was fighting 5 guys.
6.
That's what I'm saying.
6 guys.
6 guys.
6 guys. If you
tough
read
as nails, by the way.
Well, if you read on the Ringer, Bill Simmons' website, ringer.com, there's a deep dive into the guys who beat up Paul Bissonnette.
Tried to.
Yeah, these aren't
exactly.
Run of the mill golfing bros who had a few too much to drink. These are some hardened bad guys. You can
They're a
read
bunch
into
of losers is what they are.
Well, no question about that. But go back and if you want to really sort of delve a little bit deeper into it, how lucky he is that he can be joking about it. These guys all had, by and large, criminal records. They all have had run-ins with the law. These are not guys that, you would expect to, this isn't a run-of-the-mill fight. So, we're glad that he's okay, of course. And Marchand was, hilarious in chirping.
So was Josh Morrissey. Did you see Josh Morrissey?
Yeah, I saw Morrissey was too. But I mean, the fact that they were able to get away with chirping friendly is fortuitous, because those were some bad dudes that were going out.
But Drew,
sorry, go ahead, Dave.
I was just gonna say, we don't laud what you do. I mean, you go into a 5 guys all the time, and you have no problems coming out of there, without a scratch.
Dave, he loves those Cajun fries.
Thank you, Dave. That was very clever. You must be getting funnier. We'll see if we can get some stage time for you at Rumors. Maybe next to Chris Griffin tonight, 9:45. The early show, the 7:30 show is sold out, but Dave will be performing at the 9:45 show, and then the business will collapse for all eternity right after that.
Biz Nasty could absolutely, I think you'd agree, he'd be a great addition to the lineup at Rumors. I just want to say one more thing about Biz Nasty. I think what's getting lost in this is he's stuck up for the restaurant staff.
Yeah.
That's something to me that's Biz Nasty's he's a very well-known guy, right? He's got millions of followers. He's
on a national television broadcast. He's
a very well-off guy. He doesn't need to be doing that. And I think that he deserves a lot of credit for sticking up for some honest, hardworking people in a restaurant. I forget the name of the restaurant, but it was in Arizona, right?
Yeah, it's in Scottsdale.
Yeah.
Some sort of steakhouse that apparently
that's your home away from home, Drew.
Home away
Scottsdale.
from home. Yeah, it's some sort of steakhouse that apparently he goes to 5 nights a week. So
Amazing.
he knows the staff there very well. So maybe diversify your dining out options a little bit. Is what
I feel like Biz is like a medium guy. Like, I don't think he's medium rare. I think he's medium.
In terms of the steak.
Yeah, well, you're just saying he goes to the steakhouse. So I'm
yeah,
assuming
but he's
he
only
gets
there
steak.
for the salad. He was only there for the salad. If you get,
I noticed. I was thinking about that. It's like
The chat is saying it's called Houston's.
Okay, well,
There you
whatever
go.
the name of those steakhouses is, it's really not that important. But
I just think
he
it's
goes to the
impressive that he
steakhouse
stuck
for the
up
salad.
for a bunch of drunken idiots come in and they start harassing the staff, and I think he deserves credit for sticking up for them. A lot of people wouldn't do that, myself included.
Good to know there.
Well, I'm not going to take on 5 drunk guys. Like, I'm not biz nasty. I don't have those
Usually you'd
powers.
be one of the drunk guys, Ezzy.
Yeah, that's true. Yeah, typically we're the ones beating you down for being.
I might be
too
one of the drunk
intoxicated.
guys, but I would never harass. I worked in a
That's
lot of
true.
restaurants, as you guys know, in my younger years. I would never harass
That's
hard.
You're too busy in the back eating food.
Yeah,
Yeah,
exactly.
you're-
I'm too busy having a good time. I'm not going to bug these people.
There you go. Good attitude. The Jets and the Blackhawks coming up later on this afternoon. Post-game show, like I said, 5:40 p.m. The Blackhawks are a team that really it's about their inability to get the puck in the net. That's really where a
And
big
keep
reason.
it out of the net.
And we'll keep it out of the net too. But you're right. Their struggles are
They're
largely
terrible.
5-on-5 because their special teams have actually been pretty decent this year.
Shocking,
Top-
actually.
Top half of the league on both the PK and the power.
11th and 8th for the record.
Is they can't score 5-on-5 and they give up too much 5-on-5. Those two things are big red flags. But I think the real red flag here, the real issue in Chicago, and we'll talk about it with Charlie Remuliotis coming up in about 15 minutes time or so, is the play of Connor Bedard. He has not taken that next step forward on a Blackhawks team that they expected to be better this year than they were last year. And in fact, that has not materialized. They went out and they signed some veteran guys. They brought back Teuvo Teravainen, who used to play there, of course. They brought in Tyler Bertuzzi. They brought in Alec Martinez. Now, these guys are all veteran guys. They're not going to single-handedly win you Stanley Cup.
TJ Brody too, Drew.
TJ Brody too.
He's
yes.
a pretty good defenseman.
Yeah, Laurent Brossoit, of course, but we know he hasn't been able to play so far this year. So this is a team, nobody expected the Blackhawks to compete for a playoff spot, but they expected themselves to be harder to play against,
Exactly.
to be a better team, to show signs of improvement that haven't materialized yet, which is why it cost Luke Richardson his job and why Anders Sorensen is the new interim head coach for the remainder of the year for the Chicago Blackhawks.
Yeah, and obviously Charlie Remuliotis covers the Hawks on a daily basis. We've had him on the show many times before. He'll have much better insight because we obviously don't watch the Hawks a ton, guys. The Hawks
Nobody wants to watch the Hawks. They've been lousy.
Well, that's a good point. I mean, but you're right. I mean, it would be one thing if the Hawks were struggling, but Connor Bedard was still lighting it up on a nightly basis or on most nights, right? And that's simply not happening. And obviously, it's disappointing for him, that he doesn't make the Four Nations Team Canada roster, but guys, he's 19, 20 years old. Like, he's going to be a big part of, I think, future Team Canada teams. So I don't think, and his future is very bright. Like, he's one of the most skilled guys in the league, but I think you're right. That's a big concern. And also a big concern has been, the play of a guy like Taylor Hall, right? Like, Taylor Hall was brought in a few years ago, obviously suffered the injury, but Taylor Hall, I think they expected
got 10
him
points. He's got 10 points in 25. He's been
Right.
healthy. So 10 points in 25 games is not
Right.
what you
No,
want
that's
from Taylor
that's
Hall.
like third, fourth line type of numbers, as opposed to a guy that you're expecting to provide a boost to your top six, right? And obviously, right, like the top line of Phil Kurashev, Teravainen, and Bedard, like Kurashev and Bedard had some chemistry last year, but guys, on most teams, that's the second or third line, and that's where the problem lies. And Drew's absolutely right. I think Alec Martinez, TJ Brody, they've made that defense better, more respectable. A guy like Alex Vlasic, I've always been impressed by him. He's a good young up and coming
Did you just say
defenseman.
up and younging?
I meant to say young, and yes, I did. I meant to say young and upcoming defenseman, American defenseman who's from the Chicago area. So I've always been impressed by him. But yeah, it's just it's just not a very talented roster, guys. Like,
but all
you have
that said, the Jets still, anytime a team dismisses their head coach, and that's always a dangerous game. You sort of that first game against the new head coach, because the Blackhawks are going to want to show up and show out for their new head coach. This is a new. It's a new audition. This is a new guy. They know him. They're familiar with him. He was the head coach at Rockford. Yep. So there's some familiarity there. It's not like they're airlifting him in from outside the organization. So the Jets have to be, they have to be on their game still, because as long as the Jets play at the level that they're, supposed to play at, they should be able to beat the Chicago Blackhawks. Strange things can happen, of course. But the Jets do need to focus on that, because the Blackhawks are probably going to be a little bit more dialed in and a little bit more just aware of everything going on with the change in coach and with the new head coach behind the bench, Dave.
Yeah, I mean, I think that's a fair point. And one of the things that we've talked about with this Jets club, despite this losing streak, boys, is that throughout the course of the winning streak is that they played the same game consistently against opponent, regardless of who that was, whether it was a upper echelon opponent or it was a bottom of the barrel opponent. The Jets played their game. They didn't play down to their competition. Something we couldn't have said last year, because we saw them, either lose games or escape games against teams that they shouldn't have. And look, it's the NHL. Any team can beat, a goalie can get hot and can beat you. We've seen that happen, of course. But
Dave, the Blackhawks have more wins than the Predators.
No, I know. Like it again, like they're
so they do have 8 wins. They have that going for them.
Yeah, no, you're right, Ez. And look, they're 4-7-0 at home. And as I said, the weird part is that their special teams are I think it's an 8th. It's either 11th ranked power play in the 8th rank. Yeah, it's 11th ranked power play and the 8th ranked PK. Pretty good considering how bad this team is. That they've been pretty good at special teams, so that they have that going for them. But of course, we know, as everyone in the chat knows, the majority of a hockey game does not get played with special teams on the ice. So I mean, it's good to be effective in those times when you have them, but it's not often. So your 5-on-5 play is much more, indicative of how the results are going to be. And for the Chicago Blackhawks, that's 8 wins and a lot more losses. I think it's 16 losses and maybe 2 overtime or shootout losses. So it hasn't been good in Chicago. And look, Luke Richardson losing his job, it's a little unusual because, he's pretty well regarded as a good coach. I know what Drew's saying in terms of you got to worry about the bounce and but I don't know that. Like, Chicago's not St. Louis. Like, right. St. Louis was a team that we expected to be a bit better than they had been. They make the firing and they've been consistent, right? They've been winning hockey games. I think they've won 5 out of 6 so far with, new head coach, Jim Montgomery. So I think it's a little bit of a different situation in St. Louis than it would be in Chicago. And again, Charlie Roumeliotis will be able to give us more of his insight as someone who's covers the team as to what's going on really there. And you can't discount the fact that they brought Laurent Brossoit in to be kind of that steadying force like he was as a backup. Remember, what did we all say? Should Laurent Brossoit stay in Winnipeg, where he's not going to be a starter, but we know he's going to be a consistent player, and maybe that's best for his career, but nobody's going to accept that, right? So he wants to be the guy, and then
of course get paid as much money as he can get paid. Go get paid. I mean, nobody's going to fault him for that.
Well, there's getting paid, and then there's also chance to win a Stanley Cup. And if you have that, you have to kind of you have to figure out where you're, because you're not winning the Stanley Cup with the Chicago Blackhawks in the next 5 years, right? So well, my point is that during the length of
that's a bad. Sorry, Dave. Just listening to you, it's a bad roster. Like you mentioned, we've got Charlie Roumeliotis coming up in about 10 minutes. Another guy I want to ask about is Phil Kurashev, because he had 18 goals and 54 points last year. He's got 2 goals and 5 points in 23 games this year. He's your number 1 center.
So what you're saying is he's struggling.
Well, yeah, and again, I don't watch enough Hawks to know why exactly he's struggling, but Tyler Bertuzzi, we mentioned, brought him in. He's not. I think he's got 10 points in 23 games. Like, they're just, the guys that they brought in have not met expectations, and Peter Mrazek has actually been pretty solid. I was looking at his numbers.
Numbers aren't terrible. I mean,
they're above league average. The league average save percentage, guys, right now is 900. So his
So
save
Mrazek's
percentage is
at a 905, and Arvid Soderblom, who's clearly the backup, 19 games for Mrazek, 7 for Soderblom, is at a 919, which tells, and given how many goals the Blackhawks are giving up, it tells you just how much rubber these goaltenders are facing.
Exactly.
In that their numbers aren't terrible, yet they're towards the bottom of the league in goals against. In terms of goals against per game played that the Blackhawks are. So it's sort of you can just sort of see where the struggles are for the Blackhawks. This is a game where the Jets need to use their speed and structure. This is a game that dictates and demands structure from the Winnipeg Jets.
Well, the Hawks certainly don't have it.
The Hawks don't have it. So you're right. It's a pond hockey game when you're playing against them. And so what happens in a pond hockey game is if you play pond hockey style, well, anything can happen. You never know what's going to happen when you lose that structure from the Jets' perspective. But if the Jets keep that structure, they should be able to break down Chicago. They should be able to expose their various weaknesses, of which there are a lot. And the Jets should be able to dominate down low and cycle the Blackhawks to death. That's what the Jets, that's what their goal needs to be entering this game. Keep your structure, play your game, let Chicago do whatever it is that they do. And as long as the Jets do what they do best, what Chicago is trying to do shouldn't be effective. You remember the first time these two teams played each other, Chicago was winning that game up until the last, 10 minutes of it? 5 minutes of it. It was very late in the game where the Jets finally, I think, tied it up, if I recall correctly. Was that the first home game of the year? It was a while ago now. It's hard to remember.
It was in October for sure.
It might have been. It might have been the first home game of the year. And if I could just say one thing, because obviously Dave covers the American Hockey League a lot with the Moose, and he knows
second home game.
Yeah, second home game. There you go.
Okay.
With Rockford.
No. The Flames that was exhibition games, Dave.
Was it?
Yeah, do you remember they won in Edmonton on the 6-0, then they came home and won.
Oh, you're right. You're right.
I have a question. Does it really matter?
No. Go ahead, Ez. Sorry.
I just wanted to say, if you look at Rockford right now, Frank Nazar obviously was a high draft pick. What was he? 5th overall? No, 13th overall. Sorry.
Yeah.
Kevin Kurchinski, who's playing a little bit for the Hawks last year, Colton Dock. So I just wanted to get that in there that, the future is looking bright for Chicago. They do have a lot of high draft picks that are going to come into the system eventually. The only problem is, so I think that was the right, I think Dave, like a guy like Kurchinski, for example, who played the full year with the Hawks last year, I think that was the right decision to let him play in Rockford.
Yeah.
But I just think that right now, it's like Drew said, it's going to be years before this team is anywhere close to being a playoff contender.
They've got lots of first round talent. There's no question about it.
Right.
We saw Rockford here in Manitoba. I can't remember if it was on this homestand or the previous one, but they're good. They've got a good young core. There's no question about it. And I know a lot of Jets fans wanted Frank Nazar to be a Jets draft pick when he was available. So they definitely have some nice pieces. And I think Kurchinski played in Seattle, if I recall correctly. So he would have been familiar with Milic and Bauer and Lambert and those guys. So, they do have a lot of good young talent, but you're seeing the result. And again, nobody in Chicago is going to complain with all those Stanley Cups they have from the 2010-ish to 2000, whatever it was. But the fact of the matter is that you see that's just the reality of what this franchise has undergone, right? You traded away, you tried to secure teams to win Stanley Cups. But again, I don't think any team no city is going to say, well, we have 3 Stanley Cups, but we have shitty teams for the next 5-10 years. I think every team, every city is going to take that to have had the Stanley Cup for 1 or 2.
This is Chicago, though, Dave. I don't know how much longer they're going to take it.
Wow.
Banners fly forever, but patience runs thin at the same time. Charlie Roumouliotis joins us next to talk more about the Blackhawks, the Winnipeg Jets opponent, later on this afternoon. Saturday morning, it's the Illegal Curve Hockey Show, presented by Play Now. Dave Minuk, Ezra Ginsburg, and I'm your host, Drew Mindell. Don't go anywhere. Stay with us. Fitting that we end the commercial break with a Boston Pizza commercial, because we're going to bring in Charlie Roumouliotis, who's joining us from Chicago, where we can talk about deep dish pizza. He's the studio host for the Chicago Blackhawks for WGN Radio. Charlie, good morning. Thanks so much for joining us. We don't need to start the pizza wars off too early, but now I'm getting hungry at the very least.
Hey, pizza is my downfall whenever I feel like I want to cheat in my meal. So having a pizza at 10:30 in the morning, it's not the first time I would be doing it.
That's and I say amen to you with that attitude. Charlie, obviously, good morning. Nice to see you. We brought you on to talk about the Blackhawks, the Jets and the Blackhawks. Later on this afternoon, you'll have coverage on WGN Radio, of course. New head coach for the Blackhawks. Luke Richardson dismissed. Anders Sorensen in behind the bench for his first game this afternoon. Is it simply that the Blackhawks had plateaued under Luke Richardson when they expected to see a step forward that necessitated this coaching change?
Yeah, I really wrestle with what happened on Thursday because I see it from both sides. Kyle Davidson, Blackhawks general manager, at the end of last season during his exit interviews, basically came out and said, we have to take the next step in this rebuild, and so we don't want to settle for being in last place or being a bottom three team like they had been the previous 2 years. And so through 26 games, 2 months into the season, you look at this NHL standings and you're like, Blackhawks, 18 points, dead last in the NHL. And it's exactly what they didn't want to happen. So from that perspective, I understand the Blackhawks management thinking, saying, we elevated our expectations going into the season and we are in the same position as we were last year. Having said that, there have been, so in 25 of the 26 games for the Blackhawks this season, they have either led, tied, or trailed within 1 goal in the third period of every single game except one. So they have been competitive in hockey games, and they've also given up 11 empty net goals, and they've only generated 1 empty net goal of their own. So if you look at their goal differential, it's minus 18. But if you take away the empty netters, the Hawks goal differential is minus 8 in 26 games. And last year, their goal differential was minus 111. I mean, so they have taken substantial strides in that department. We haven't seen as many 5-1 losses this year for the Blackhawks. They have really been in games late in the third period. The problem is they haven't been able to get over the hump of finishing off those games and picking up points in those games. And so it's been a real struggle for me as I wrestle with whether this was the right decision or not, because in some level, they have been competitive far more than last year. But from a results standpoint, their record is like identical to what it is last season through 26 games.
So what you're saying, Charlie, is we should expect a tight checking, close game this afternoon, which if you remember the first game, obviously, I'm not saying that you don't remember that game, but I believe that game was a 1-goal game. And the Jets have been in a lot of 4-1 games as of late. It's been weird. Almost every single game on that road trip was a 4-1 win or a 4-1 loss, which we've been talking about is kind of bizarre. But I wanted to ask you about Connor Bedard. Obviously, a lot of focus was him not making Team Canada, but I don't want to ask you about that. I just want to ask for your assessment of his play, because obviously you look at his numbers and you'd say, okay, 19 points in 24 games, not bad. I don't watch enough Hawks to know on a night in, night out basis how he's played. Obviously, the sky's the limit for his potential. Everybody knows that, it's just a matter of time before he puts together a 100-point plus season. But watching him on a nightly basis, what stood out to you about Bedard so far in his sophomore year?
Yeah, it is funny because we talk about how he's in the midst of a sophomore slump, and then you see the Blackhawks stats and you're like, oh, he leads the team in assists and points, and it's like, oh, he's right there and generating the offense. But here's what I'll say. He went through that 12-game stretch earlier in the season where he did not score a single goal. And the first 4 or 5 games, he was generating shot attempts. Like you would look at the score sheet and it'd be like Connor Bedard, 4 shots on goal, 7 shot attempts. The second half of that drought, he wasn't even generating any shot attempts. He went, I think, back-to-back games without a shot on goal. He had like 2 shots on goal in some of the game. Like it got to a point where I'm like, okay, the old adage of when the chances stop, that's when you should start being concerned. And so the first part of that goal drought for Connor Bedard is like, okay, he's getting his chances. Eventually, if he continues on that path, they're going to go in. But then his chances started to trail off. And then this is maybe part of the reason why maybe Luke Richardson lost his job. But for several weeks in a row, I mean, we're talking at like 11, 12 games in a row, the Blackhawks had changed up their lines every single game. And so Bedard was playing with seemingly like the entire forward roster, and he wasn't able to kind of develop some consistent chemistry with line mates. And I think that might have been part of the reason why he was struggling. But, Luke Richardson also didn't want to, he's like, I don't want to roll back the same lines if they're not working. And so it was this weird balance. And so for going into today's game against Winnipeg, it's going to be Connor Bedard on a line with Philip Kurashev, who he spent the most time with last season, and they developed great chemistry. And then Teuvo Teravainen on the right wing, who Connor and him had that really hot start at the beginning of their road trip. So, I think I'm not concerned in the bigger picture with Connor Bedard. I will say Anders Sorensen is he's the new interim head coach for the Blackhawks. He has a developmental background. So he started as a development coach for the Hawks for 5 years. And so if his priority number 1, 2, and 3 for him is to make sure that Connor Bedard is unlocking his full potential, I think the rest is going to kind of trickle down.
Why did they, go with the experiment of Bedard on the wing?
Yeah, I think that was in the middle of the stretch where he wasn't generating any shot attempts. So I think the Hawks were like, okay, he's not getting shots on goal. I think they wanted to do it sooner, but he was having that homecoming game in Vancouver, and so they probably didn't want to make it a talking point going into Hockey Night in Canada, and it's his hometown. And they would probably, so they did it the game after that where they moved him to the wing. And also, I'm not sure if you guys have looked at his face-off numbers, but he is like legitimately, he might be the worst player in the NHL in face-offs. So he has not won anything. So it's not like he's winning 50% of his draws where it's worth justifying keeping him there. I think the Hawks were like, he's not winning any face-offs. He's not generating any scoring chances when he was in the prior games. We have to free him up offensively by moving him to the wing. And they ended up putting Jason Dickinson on his line, who is like the most dependable defensive forward on the Blackhawks. So it was probably like hey, let Jason worry about the defensive aspect of the game. You focus on generating offense. And it kind of worked for like a game and a half, but then they went away from it because they're like, all right, I think his primary position is center.
Okay, so that's a short-term experiment now.
For sure.
They've gone awry.
Yeah, short-term experiment. Yep.
Charlie, I wanted to ask you about the special teams because that seems to be the one area that the Hawks are having some success. 11th ranked power play, the 8th ranked PK. So what has allowed that to at least flourish in Chicago?
Yeah, that's been the huge bright spot for Chicago when it comes to offensively, because last season they had a real tough time scoring 5-on-5, but their power play also wasn't good either. So it was a grind to score offense last year. This year, at least they've been able to kind of hang their hat on, like the Columbus game, they score 3 power play goals, but they still lose 6-3. Like it was very weird. They couldn't generate anything at 5-on-5 this season. And it's kind of like a similar pace as last year, which is a little concerning. But with the power play, I just think they're getting more point shots. Like Seth Jones played a big role on that before he got hurt. The Hawks went that road trip that you talked about that was in Winnipeg, the second game. Like the Hawks, they then went to Edmonton the next day and they scored 3 power play goals against the Oilers and 2 or 3 power play goals. And Seth Jones was the driving force of that, where he was getting point shots and it was kind of opening up the seam for Bedard and Teravainen to play off each other. And so the one thing, the Hawks hit a little bit of a lull a few weeks ago where they went through a 5-game stretch where they had only 1 power play in each of the 5 games. And I think it was the worst stretch in NHL or in franchise history, or like fewest power plays in a 5-game stretch. And so they weren't getting any power plays. And so they kind of busted out of that. They have over the last few games where they've finally recorded multiple power plays. And over that stretch, the entries were a real struggle for them, but they've since kind of broken out of that. And now it's kind of getting set up in the offensive zone. So we'll see. It feels like it's a new storyline every game. So we'll see how it performs today against Winnipeg.
Well, you talk about a new storyline in every game, Charlie. Charlie Rouleotis, our guest on the Illegal Curve Hockey Show. Charlie covers the Blackhawks for WGN Radio. What's job number 1? What's task number 1 for Anders Sorensen behind the bench? Is it structure? Is it, figure out a way to generate more at 5-on-5? He's coming in, he's got an audition for the remainder of the year. What's goal number 1, job number 1, task number 1 as the new man behind the bench?
Yeah. So aside from unlocking Connor Bedard and making sure that his confidence is back to where it needs to be, and because I think if you unlock Bedard, he's going to score more goals. He's going to generate more offense. His line mates are then going to get some cookies, and they're going to generate some offense and some more confidence. The power play is going to take a next step, and it's kind of going to be this trickle-down effect. Having said that, I think priority number one is developing the younger players, like making sure Lucas Reichel, Connor Bedard, they're all trending in the right direction. But I also kind of want to put some more pressure on the veterans that the Hawks brought in to surround Connor Bedard so he didn't have to perform with such pressure. Like last year, every opponent that came into Chicago that faced the Hawks was like, shut down 98 and you're going to win the hockey game. This year, it's like Teuvo Teravainen and Tyler Bertuzzi were brought in offseason additions. Ilya Mikheyev as well via trade. Taylor Hall back after the ACL injury. And Hall, Bertuzzi, and Teravainen. Teravainen had that really hot stretch in the first 5 games of the season, but since then, he's really trailed off offensively. And none of those guys have really produced much offense at 5-on-5. And so I don't think it's a coincidence that Connor is struggling because those other guys are also struggling and they're not lifting him up when they kind of need it. And I should throw out Philip Kurashev's name in there as well. I mean, that was a guy that he was the second in points in the Blackhawks last year. And I think he's by far the worst in plus minus. Weird stat, I know, but he's by far the worst on Chicago. And so he hasn't generated much offense. He hasn't been great defensively.
He's got 5 points on the year.
5 points. And his situation is a little bit different because last year he was playing consistently on a line with Connor Bedard and on the first power play. And this year, I don't think he's gotten any power play, like first power play unit time. I think he's been on the second unit. Maybe he's had a couple games where he has like some shifts in there. But so yeah, I think it's unlocking the guys around Connor too, so they can free him up. And so I'm confident that Anders Sorensen will do that because he does come from that developmental background. But I don't think if I'm Anders Sorensen, I'm not walking into the Blackhawks locker room and trying to win over the Pat Maroons and Alec Martinez's who have 3 Stanley Cups. Like I'm trying to unlock the young guys because if you unlock the young guys, then the veterans know what situation they signed up for. So they're like, we got to get those young guys going. And if they get going, then we know our team will get going.
Charlie, I wanted to ask you about Alex Vlasic. I was talking about him when we were previewing the Jets-Hawks before you jumped on. And Jets fans will be familiar with Vlasic because this is his third full season in the NHL, or at the very least, second full season in the NHL. Obviously a big guy. If I'm not mistaken, he grew up very close to Chicago, right? Like a suburb of Chicago, right? Met. So always a good story when a hometown boy is drafted. But every time I watch him play, like he can skate and he's got great hockey sense. Obviously his offensive numbers, it's not like they're jumping off the page. Like he's not Quinn Hughes or anything like that, but it just seems like, he has been such a bright spot on the back end for the Blackhawks.
Yeah, totally agree. And when he got drafted by the Hawks in the second round a few years ago, he was kind of labeled, you see the size, 6'6", whatever. And you're like, this guy is a true shutdown type defenseman. And I think that's what the Blackhawks originally kind of pegged him in the role for. And then he came over to North America and he played in Rockford for 1 full season when he was probably NHL ready. Like he probably could have held his own in the NHL, but they decided to keep him in the AHL for a full year. And while he was doing so, they also put him on the first power play. He was first penalty kill. He was playing in all situations. And so when he got to the NHL, his offensive ceiling was raised. And I know his offensive numbers don't look very sexy when you look at it right now, but you'll watch it today. Like there are times where he's up in the rush. Last year, I'm not kidding, I think he had like 4 or 5 breakaways as a defenseman. Like it was crazy. He's got amazing, powerful strides. And so for me, I don't think the Hawks see him anymore as like this shutdown defenseman. Like he can definitely play that role, but I also feel like his offensive ceiling is a little bit elevated and he can contribute in that area, so much so that I believe he's played his way onto Team USA's radar for the Olympics in 2026, because he's not a guy that's kind of like one-dimensional. He can play multiple different roles. And so he has been legitimately one of the bright spots for the Chicago Blackhawks over the last couple of years.
You're on mute, Dave.
I haven't done that in a while. Charlie, when Laurent Brossoit left Winnipeg, the thought was he was going to be the starter in Chicago. Before, as said, we were previewing the Hawks Jets, and Drew was talking about how the whole goaltending has been pretty good for Chicago. But how tough is it for Laurent Brossoit? We saw, I think last week they said he's going to be evaluated. He had to have a follow-up surgery, so it's another 6 weeks for him. How tough has it been for him? And for the plan in Chicago, seems to be okay given the fact that you've got some goaltenders who have stepped up in his absence.
Yeah, for sure. Last year was like Arvid Soderblom. He had the first few games that he turned in were actually pretty solid. And this poor guy, he's played in, I think, 57 games for the Blackhawks, Arvid Soderblom, and he only has 8 wins to show for it. I mean, it's like this poor guy's confidence took a little bit of a hit last year, so much so that during the middle part of the season last year, his confidence waned and he was really struggling. And so the Hawks bringing in Brossoit, they were hoping he would be the 1B to Peter Mrazek, the 1A, so they can lessen Mrazek's load, but also provide some stability that when they do have to play their 1B goaltender, it's not just punting on 35 games of the season where you're putting the young players in a bad situation where if they make a mistake, it's likely going to end up in the back of the net because they don't have that last line of defense there. And so credit to Soderblom. He's been terrific this year. His numbers are exceptional. Unfortunately, again, only 1 win to show for it, which is mind-boggling because his save percentage is like .925 through 7 starts. And so for Brossoit, it's really difficult because like I saw, he was originally put on a 5 to 7 week timeline. And then right around that timeline, he was skating for like a week or 2. Then we wouldn't see him for a couple weeks. Then we would see him back on the ice for a week, and then we wouldn't see him again. And then he went like 3 weeks where we didn't even see him. And we're like, what's going on with Brossoit? Is everything going on? And then sure enough, he ends up having that cleanup procedure. And former Blackhawks head coach Luke Richardson said at the time, right before the cleanup procedure, basically said he's kind of dealing with something similar as Thatcher Demko. And I heard that and I was like, oh boy, like, we know how long he's been out. And so, so you wonder how long this might linger for Brossoit because he's going to be reevaluated in 6 weeks from whenever they sent out that release. And so, man, we're probably not looking until at least end of January because he's going to need weeks of practice time. And the interesting wrinkle to all of this, not to be too long-winded on it, but Arvid Soderblom is 3 games away from appearing in his 60th game. Once he appears in game number 60, he has to go through waivers to go back to the minors. And so it's an interesting wrinkle for the Blackhawks because there's no way they want to do that because he's for sure going to get claimed likely. And so if Brossoit is ready to return, whatever that is, end of January, sometime in February, then the Hawks might run into a situation where they have 3 goaltenders and they're going to have to kind of find that balance of how to handle that.
Are we expecting Soderblom or Mrazek this afternoon?
I would expect Mrazek today. Yeah, I think you go to Mrazek, and he's had a tough last few games. His glove hand has been a little off lately. He had the Minnesota Black Friday game when the Hawks were leading 2-0, ended up losing that game 3-2, and on the game-winning goal for Jared Spurgeon, his second of the game, Mrazek it went right through his glove, and it was a softie, and he'd be the first to say it too. So I don't want to be too critical of that, but would be nice for Mrazek to get back on track for the Blackhawks today, especially with you kind of go through a coaching change. You kind of want to have your guy in there.
Charlie always play well against the Jets, though. From my recent memory, Mrazek usually plays pretty solid. So even though, like you said, Charlie, he's been struggling a little bit, I don't know if that necessarily means the Jets are going to pop in 4 or 5 goals on him. But I'd have to check the numbers. But I know the Jets have faced Mrazek many times over the years.
Well, it's funny because I was just thinking about this right before I hopped on. How I feel like Winnipeg badly would want Laurent Brossoit in this game because I feel like Brossoit is always unbelievable against Chicago. Like I don't know what his record is against the Blackhawks, but it's nice that Brossoit is on this side, even though he's not dressed.
Yeah.
You brought up the second game of the season. Hawks were 64 seconds away from shutting out Winnipeg. Like I just wonder how, and then they go on to have the best start in NHL history. I wonder if you're the Blackhawks, if you win that game, it changes the course of Winnipeg, how their start shapes up. And then maybe it changes the feeling for Chicago too. I don't know.
Drop a pebble in the ocean. You never know what changes are going to occur. Charlie Roumeliotis is going to have coverage of the Blackhawks and the Jets later this afternoon on WGN Radio in Chicago. Charlie, thanks so much for joining us. Appreciate your time. Great to catch up with you again.
No problem. Great to see all you guys.
Take care,
Thanks,
Charlie.
Charlie.
Thanks
All
very
right.
much.
See ya.
Bye-bye. There he goes, Charlie, joining us this morning. Always a great guest, so insightful into the Blackhawks. Yeah, the Jets and the Hawks later on this afternoon. 3 o'clock puck drop, which makes for a 5:40 p.m. post-game show back here on our YouTube channel. So a quick turnaround, and then another quick turnaround as we're going to do the two back-to-backs, the Saturday-Sunday editions, as the Jets will fly home to meet the Blue Jackets, a Blue Jackets team that'll be waiting for the Winnipeg Jets, if I'm not mistaken, because I believe that they played last night in Calgary. Where'd they play? Sorry, Vancouver. Columbus played in Vancouver last night, lost 5-2. Presumably will fly
But
to
they're taking the
Winnipeg
train
today.
to get here, Drew, so they'll be
They're taking the train. Oh, it's going to be tough. They might not make it in time for the 5 o'clock puck drop tomorrow. But nonetheless, the Jets and the Blackhawks tomorrow, which makes post game right around 7:40 p.m. tomorrow. So
Reminds me of the time that Dave, Ritchie, and I traveled from Philadelphia to Boston on a train.
We did do
and
that.
we got shushed big time by the I don't know what you call the person, a train attendant.
Well, we were in the quiet car, Ezzy.
We were in the quiet car,
Which
and
is
we were
not
being
something I
very
should
loud.
which is not something I should ever been
No.
allowed in, for the
How'd
record.
they ever let the two of you in the three
about
of you
Ezzy,
in a
I'm-
quiet car is hard
Yeah.
to believe. Even if Ezzy was asleep, his snoring would have disrupted the quiet car
Oh, yeah.
and been a cause for concern.
They escorted us out. It's all good.
That's okay. That was after the Philadelphia draft. You guys went on to Boston.
It's
and
We
I
went on
went
to
home,
Boston,
so.
saw a couple Red Sox games, lived it up. Yeah, checked out Cheers. It was great.
Paul Revere Hotel, no big deal.
Went to Harvard.
You guys
The
are
Little
closest
rooftop
I ever got
patio.
to Harvard, Drew.
we know that. Don't worry. You know, we're well aware. You went to the Harvard School of
Ezzy's
Bartending is
got a
where you
T-shirt that
went.
says, "I went to Harvard and got this T-shirt."
Exactly right. Dave M., the Manitoba Moose, they had a great start to the game last
They did.
night. Why don't you tell everybody about it in this edition?
Put on your antlers. It's time for the Minute Moose Minute on the Illegal Curve Hockey Show.
You know, my
Too slow, Drew.
No, I was building up the anticipation for it. It's about the timing, something you haven't learned anything about in the 15 plus years of doing this radio show. Let me worry about the timing. You just worry about your Harvard bartending school classes. You know, Dave, talk about the Manitoba Moose while I stew in my own rage.
All right. So the Manitoba Moose back in action. They're closing out their homestand, 6-game homestand last night against the Belleville Senators. They got some good news this week. Talked to 2021 first rounder Chaz Lucius. He had been only in 3 of the first 6 games, then missed the next 11, which is about a month of the season, because he was, of course, dealing with that ankle rehab situation. So, you know, and this is not unexpected. We didn't think it was going to be a linear path for him, and it hasn't been, of course. But he's feeling really good. He was very positive when I spoke to him on Thursday at Canada Life.
Sorry, let me stop you for a second there. So he played 3 of the first 6.
Yeah,
Then he missed 11.
correct.
Was it was there an injury specific,
No.
or was it just a function of they need to build the ankle back up to strength, and they were doing that with non-game
skating.
situations?
Yeah. And I think it was that. And it was, and the reality was, as I said with Mark Morrison, as I said with Chaz Lucius, like the truth is that nobody knew how this was going to go for him. You couldn't say like, okay, you rehab, now you're ready to go and play like normal. The plan was just to kind of play him every second game like they did 3 out of the first 6. And then the hope was to get him into more regular action. Turns out that more regular action was going to be a month off, which is not great for him or the team because they could have used him. But sure enough, now he seems really good. He said that the ankle feels great and he's already ready now to play. It's not like they're not back to square one, which I think is the most important part. They're not going, okay, well, now we'll try and get him into every second game. The plan is to play him in consecutive games. So the expectation, unless something's changed, and we'll find out tonight, puck drops at 6. So we'll find out around 5:30, but into or 5 o'clock when they release the roster, we'll find out if he's in today's game. But the expectation, I believe, is that he's supposed to play. What's up, Ez?
He looked, well, I was going to say, his ankle looks fine to me. That shot yesterday, I believe it was the first shot of the game.
It was
an absolute bullet.
Yeah. Well, that's what he is. He's got a lot of talent. For him, it's not, I think he's actually one of the most talented Jets prospects they have in the system. I just think it's his health. If he can stay healthy, there really aren't any limits. He's big. He's got skill. He's got a shot. Like, he is a very exciting prospect for Jets fans. Again, I understand the hesitation based on the injury reality for him since, college, since before he got drafted, right? So that's the biggest thing. So they got him back after IR skating for the last month. Simon Lundmark, he also another Jets draft pick. He was also back. He had been on IR skating. He missed the last game last week against Calgary. And so you got those two guys back, which was good news, of course, because Brad Lambert had been recalled. No real changes for the Moose. Kaapo Kähkönen caught the net instead of Thomas Milic. But as he just said, and if you haven't seen it, we've got it on our Instagram. We've got it on the website, illegalcurve.com, and we've got it on my Twitter. But Chaz Lucius opens the scoring. First shot of the game for the Moose. Just an absolute rip. And you could see that, he's feeling good. And then he quickly gets his second point about 7 minutes. Actually, it was exactly 7 minutes later because he wins the faceoff, gets it back to Elias Salamonson, the Jets prospect, who's actually now tied for the Moose lead. Not really a great stat because only 12 points in 17 games, but he has got the tie for the Moose scoring lead with Nikita Chibrikov. He rips the shot on net, and Parker Ford tipped it home. So now it was 2-0. And then Jared Anderson-Dolan, one of those veterans that the Moose need to be scoring, he gets his first in antlers in the second period. So it's 3-0 for the Moose. And you're thinking
antlers? Wasn't wearing a helmet. He was wearing antlers.
He wears those little antlers on his head.
Oh,
and so
I didn't know that was loud.
Yeah, no, it's amazing actually. So it's 3-0, kind of like in Europe, the guy with the leading scorer wears the gold helmet. Yeah. Well, for the Moose guys, they wear antlers. It's rather remarkable. Anyways, 3-0. And if hockey games were only, 30 minutes, the Moose are looking fantastic. They've got the easy win.
Same as the Illegal Curve hockey show, by the way. If it was only 30 minutes, we'd look fantastic.
There you go. But unfortunately for the Moose, it is not. And then 3 goals by Belleville in about 9 minutes, tied the game after 40 minutes, 3-3. And then an absolute, brain fart. 2 guys going for the puck, leave it behind. One guy, actually, Salamonson, had just knocked the guy down in the Jets zone. He hadn't cleared the zone yet. And so one of the Senators picks up the puck, goes in on a basically one-on-one, and then finds, I don't think Kähkönen knew the guy was even there because he had been knocked down. And he was actually complaining to the ref about not getting a penalty call. And he's like, okay, I'll just stand by the net and put this puck into the net. So 4-3, and then Belleville finished it off with 2 empty net goals. So it's a 6-3 final. By the way, if you want to go to the game, Teddy Bear Toss, Pajama Party, we've got 4 tickets in the Illegal Curve zone. I see Dave or Dave@illegalcurve.com. Send me an email. The only bad news.
You're actually going to throw Drew on the ice.
We're throwing Drew from the press box.
I'm very teddy bear like, admittedly.
But I will say that there was some bad. So Chaz Lucius, really good news. The Jets prospect looked real good. Again, it's about consistency and getting into games for him. The bad news was that Elias Salamonson got crushed into the boards, as he mentioned earlier, and it didn't look good. I don't think he's going to play in the game. If he plays today, I'll be shocked because it looked bad. It was late in the third period, or I don't know exactly when, about 12 minutes to go in the game in the third period. So not great with respect to that prospect because he's been having a real good season, but Chaz Lucius was looking good. And I won't go too far into prospects because we're getting into overtime, but Colby Barlow he's heating up as Team Canada snub. He had a goal and assist yesterday for Oshawa. Kieran Walton, 2 assists for Sudbury.
There's the Kieran Walton mention.
Yeah. Well, I mean, come on. He's tied for 7th in the OHL scoring, leading Sudbury, I think, by 15 points. So 6'6", 6th-round pick. He's looking good. And, of course, Braden Yeager, he has 3 points for his new team, the Lethbridge Hurricanes, yesterday. So he's off to a good start with his new club.
In Dave's defense, Murat this morning came out with an article about some of the Jets prospects, and he too mentioned Kieran Walton. So it's not just Dave Manouk driving the Kieran Walton train. Murat has decided to join on.
That's a little bit of a Johnny, what we call a Murat come lately. I mean, some of us have been on this. Some of us have been in on this since the beginning. We don't just do features once in a blue
I didn't
moon.
hear a Kevin He update there.
Don't worry, Murat covered that too.
Kevin He had, I tend to give Kevin He and Jacob Julian. Those guys Jacob Julian actually got shut out in points against Colby Barlow, and Kevin He came up a little bit short, as did Zach Naring and who's the Jets draft pick on Denver? Brown.
Connor
Brown?
Levis.
No, Connor Levis is on Vancouver. Who's the Jets draft pick? The Garrett Brown, 4th rounder. Come on, boys. They both got shut out. They played each other. They're playing each other again tonight. There'll be a rematch.
Dave Manouk, ladies and gentlemen, like only he can. It's the best way to finish this morning's edition of the Illegal.
Well, hold on, Drew. We shouldn't actually. I'm a little disappointed in both of you guys because neither one of you have noticed anything.
What are
Look
we
at my
supposed to have
background.
noticed?
Well, there's an IC logo there, which
There we go. It's not just an IC logo. That's
Is
a
that
that's
a lamp?
No, it's we had my brother actually, shout out to Dan.
Oh, the woodworking.
Had some woodworking done by Luck St. Hold on, I'm gonna get the guy's name. I want to get it right, but check this out. He made this IC logo for me for me.
Well, where's ours?
Well, I mean,
Ezzy, you need
Dan's
drywall
your
before
brother.
you can hang anything up.
I
this
can't hang
guy-
anything in my house.
Oh, shout out to Winnipeg woodworker Luck St. Croix. I don't know if he's related to
Are you
Rick
sure it's
St.
not
Croix,
Luke?
is he?
I'm gonna say, is it Luke or Luck?
Luck,
Pretty sure it's probably Luke.
I'm going Luck. He's
How
lucky.
does he spell it?
I'm going with Luck.
Your mom's a French teacher, for God's sakes.
That doesn't mean I'm a good French student. I'm a terrible French teacher. Yeah, it's Luke. Sorry, I misread that. Luke St. Croix, Winnipeg woodworker. Check him out on Instagram. But he did a real good job on the
Lucky
IC
Luke.
logo. Lucky Luke. That's what they call him.
I like it.
That's it. Great job on the woodworking. Great job on the show. Great job on the chatting. We'll be back in about 6 hours and 40 minutes with the Illegal Curve post-game show. Big thanks to all of you. Big thanks to our sponsors who make the Saturday show, the post-game show, and the website a possibility. Our friends at Play Now, they're the title sponsor. Rumors Restaurant and Comedy Club. If you want to go to Rumors tonight, Chris Griffin, 9:45. 7:30 is already sold out. Holt Dental, Boston Pizza, City Place. We'll be at City Place on Tuesday, so spend your lunch hour with us down there as we preview the Jets and the Boston Bruins. And, of course, our friends at Seagram's. They'll be back later tonight with the shot of the game, assuming I don't forget about it again. Big thanks to all of these fine businesses for their continued support of Illegal Curve Hockey. If you haven't already done so, smash the like button, subscribe to the podcast, subscribe to the website, subscribe to the YouTube channel, and tell your friends, tell your family. The best place to be on each and every Saturday morning and after every Winnipeg Jets game is, of course, the Illegal Curve YouTube channel. Have a great rest of your Saturday, everybody. We'll be back in like I said, later on this afternoon for the Jets and the Blackhawks, the recap of that game. For Dave Manouk, for Ezra Ginsburg, I'm your host, Drew Mandel. If it's Saturday, it's the Illegal Curve Hockey Show.
Thanks for listening to this broadcast from Illegal Curve Hockey. For more great Illegal Curve content, subscribe to the Illegal Curve YouTube channel, follow at Illegal Curve on Twitter, Facebook, and Instagram, and visit your online home for hockey in Winnipeg, illegalcurve.com.